Picture a warrior standing between two armies at dawn, his great bow slack in his hand, his knees giving way beneath him. This is the opening image of the Bhagavad Gītā, and it is not, at its root, a story about war. It is a story about a man who has confused what is real with what merely feels real, and who has found in that confusion a strange and terrible comfort. Arjuna sees his kinsmen arrayed across the field at Kurukshetra, and something in him breaks open. He weeps. He cannot act. And the Gita spends the next 17 chapters asking a single difficult question. What exactly has defeated him? The answer the text gives is māyā, not weakness, not cowardice, something older, more pervasive, and this is what makes the teaching so precise, something that wears the face of virtue. The word māyā comes from the Sanskrit root ma, meaning to measure. Monier Williams traces its early sense to wisdom and extraordinary power, but from the Vedic period forward it accumulates a darker resonance. Illusion, deception, sorcery, the capacity to make things appear as what they are not. In the Rig Veda, māyā is the power by which the gods create and sustain the cosmos. Not a malevolent trick, but a generative force, divine technique shaping the perceived world into form. The Atharva Veda, in its 8th book, portrays māyā as the esoteric power of the asuras, a knowledge rooted in intellectual skill, independent of morality, capable of benefiting or hindering human welfare. From the beginning, then, the tradition refuses to fix māyā as simply good or simply evil. It is a form of power, and power is always ambiguous. By the time the Shvetashvatara Upanishad is composed, scholars place it somewhere between the 6th and 4th century BCE, within the Taittiriya branch of the Kṛṣṇa Yajurveda. The word has accumulated philosophical weight that the earlier hymns could not have anticipated. In the 10th verse of the 4th chapter, the sage Shvetashvatara declares, Mayam tu prakritim vidyan, mayanam tu maheshvaram, tasyavaya babhutais tu vyaptam, sarvam idam jagat. Know that Prakriti is Maya, and Maheshvara is the wielder of Maya. The whole world is pervaded by beings who are part of him. A careful reader should pause here, because the text is doing something more precise than later popular usage suggests. Dominic Goodall, among others, has noted that Maya in this verse most likely means primal matter rather than illusion in the abstract sense. What the Upanishad is saying is not that the world is false, but that the world as we experience it, as measurable, differentiated, form-giving substance, is the Mayan's craft. Someone wields it, someone is the magician, and the watcher who takes the magic show for ultimate reality is not a fool. They are simply in the condition the show is designed to produce. This is the architecture that the Bhagavad Gītā inherits when Kṛṣṇa speaks on the battlefield. In the 13th verse of the 7th chapter, Kṛṣṇa says to the stricken Arjuna, Tribir gunamayar pavayar, ebhi sarvam idam jagat, mohitam nabhi janati mam, ebhyas paramavyayam. Deluded by the 3 modes of material nature, the 3 gunas, all this world does not know me, who am beyond them, imperishable. The mechanism is stated plainly. It is the 3 gunas, sattva, rajas, tamas, clarity and passion and inertia, that constitute the threads of Maya's weaving. The word guna itself means strand or rope, and commentators have always appreciated that doubleness. These are qualities of nature, yes, but they are also the cords by which the embodied soul is bound. Mohitam, deluded, bewildered, turned around. The Sanskrit is unsparing, not distracted, not confused. Mohitam, turned to face the wrong direction and made to feel that this direction is home. What Kṛṣṇa identifies in Arjuna at the opening of the Gita is named in the 2nd chapter with a specific technical term, Karpanya dosha, the defect of the Kripana, the small-souled one, false compassion, emotional contraction that wears the clothing of virtue. Arjuna is weeping over his kinsman and calling it grief, but Kṛṣṇa sees something else. There is a secondary pleasure in this grief, a self-importance in the suffering, a kind of ownership that makes the sorrow feel noble and therefore worth preserving. This is the pleasure of being deceived in its most intimate form. It is not that Arjuna does not feel real pain. He does. It is that he has found a home in that pain, that the pain has become an identity. An identity, once formed, does not relinquish itself without a fight. Anyone who has watched a person they love choose their story of injury over the possibility of moving forward will recognize what the Gita is describing. A woman in her 40s, whose younger sister stopped speaking to her after a family funeral, a dispute over their mother's things, something small that became something large. Years pass. The older sister replays the afternoon of the argument with a precision she cannot apply to happier memories. She knows somewhere that the story she tells herself is by now more curated than true, but the story has given her a shape, a grievance, a reason to feel wrongly treated. There is a comfort in it, and the comfort is the problem. That is Karpanya dosha, wearing civilian clothes. The 14th verse of the 7th chapter offers the prescription, and it is not what a willful mind hopes to hear. Daivi hi isha gunamai, mama maya, durataya, mam eva ye prapadyante, maya metam taranti te. This divine maya of mine, consisting of the three modes, is extremely difficult to overcome. But those who surrender to me alone cross over this maya. The word durataya, extremely difficult to cross, is important. Kṛṣṇa does not say it cannot be crossed. He says it is very hard to cross by means of one's own effort and analysis. The exit is prapatti, surrender. Specifically, surrender to the source of maya itself. Shankara's commentary, rendered by Gambhīrananda, is precise on this point. Those who wholeheartedly take refuge in me alone, in me who am the master of maya, and who am their own self, by giving up all forms of rights and duties, they cross over this maya which deludes all beings. You cannot think your way out of maya using the mind that maya has shaped. You can only approach the one who holds the thread. Then in the 25th verse of the same chapter comes a phrase that deepens the teaching still further. Naham prakasha sarvasyo yogamaya samavrita, mudo yam nabhijanati, loko mam ajamavyayam. I am not manifest to everyone. I am covered by my internal potency, yoga maya, and therefore the foolish do not know me as unborn and inexhaustible. Here a distinction enters that the commentarial tradition has always treated with care. Yoga maya is not the same as the external maya of the gunas. It is a divine concealing power, the intimacy by which the ultimate reality withholds itself from those who are not ready to receive it, and reveals itself to those who have surrendered. The same covering that obscures Kṛṣṇa from the inattentive soul is the veil that, when lifted, becomes grace. The concealment is purposive. The illusion is not a mistake. This is precisely what the Puranic literature dramatizes in the figure of Narada. In the Devi Bhagavata Purana and related texts, Narada, one of the mind-born sons of Brahma, a sage who moves between worlds singing the names of Vishnu, approaches Vishnu and asks to understand the nature and greatness of Maya. He does not ask tentatively. He asks from confidence. He already knows the concept. He has spent his eternal existence untangled from the household life that binds ordinary souls. And Vishnu, rather than answering with doctrine, sends simply, "Fetch me water from that river." What happens next is the teaching. Through the touch of Vishnu's Maya, Narada enters a complete human life. Wife, children, household, seasons of happiness, seasons of grief, the whole architecture of attachment. A lifetime apparently passes. Then Vishnu dissolves the vision, and Narada finds himself standing at the riverbank. Moments have passed. The story reports that when Vishnu's Maya was dispelled, Narada begged forgiveness. Not because he had sinned, but because he understood, for the first time from inside, what he had only known from outside. The pleasure of that illusory life was entirely real while it lasted. The love for the wife and children was real. The grief at their loss within the vision was real. The problem was not that the experience was pleasurable. The problem was that Narada had no means from inside the illusion of knowing it was one. Avidya, non-knowledge, ignorance of the true self, is the technical name for this condition at the individual level. Maya operates cosmically. Avidya is its shadow in the individual psyche. Shankara's Advaita reading identifies the perceived differences between Brahman and the individual soul as produced by Maya operating as avidya. The soul mistakenly identifies with the body, accepting thoughts like, I am this body, this is my household, these are my people, this is my grief. None of these identifications are fabrications in the ordinary sense. They feel absolutely true. They feel, in fact, truer than anything else. That is what makes them Maya. Think of a man in his mid-50s sitting beside his father in a hospital room. His father, a man who built his entire sense of self around being capable, sharp, the one people turn to, now unable to recognize his own son on some mornings. The son finds himself grieving not just the illness but an entire version of himself, the one who was seen by this particular man, whose approval organized so much of his interior life. The grief is real. The love inside the grief is real. But somewhere underneath the vigil, he is also protecting a story. The story of what this relationship meant. The story of who he was inside it. And that story, held too tightly, becomes its own form of Maya. Not because grief is wrong, but because the story of self that grief is serving may be precisely the attachment the teaching is pointing toward. The Gita does not ask Arjuna to feel less. It asks him to see clearly what he is feeling and why, and what it is actually in service of. What to carry forward into your actual day. Wherever you find yourself most certain that your suffering is completely and self-evidently justified. That the grief, the grievance, the story of injury needs no examination because its weight alone proves its truth. That is exactly where Maya works most quietly. Not in obvious delusion, but in the place that feels most real. The Gita calls this mohitam, turned around and made to feel that this direction is home. The beginning of clarity is not the abandonment of feeling, but the willingness to ask who is doing the feeling and what they are holding on to. The bow does not need to be raised. The self that insists on carrying it does.